Okay, so as Katie said, my name is Ben Scout. I work in Washington County, so the southern part of the state. And I've been asked to present on chickens in your backyard. And chickens is a really fun topic to go over. It's one that we try and hit every year at this conference. We go over a lot of different things. This year, we felt like we needed to do some of the basic chickens in your backyard. So that's what this presentation will focus on, and a couple of different questions that we answer. Oh, good, it'll advance. So some of the key topics that we wanted to cover. One is, what do I need to know before getting chickens? Impulse buying of chickens is not encouraged. We want to make sure that we have things set up before the chickens come home, or we order them through the mail, however we acquire them. The second thing we'll go over are things to consider when selecting chicken breeds. And that's one of the funnest parts of the chicken industry, is there's so many different breeds and so many different characteristics that you're going to be looking for. And we wanted to go over some of the important ones that often get overlooked. And then the last one, and there's just a couple of slides, and I'll try and leave those up as long as I can and share some links after the presentation. But there are a couple of resources that we wanted to pass on for you to be able to use and to get some more information from. So first question, what do I need to know before getting chickens? So there's 5 things that I wanted to focus on. The one, and probably the most important one before we even look at chickens, are what are your local regulations? The second one is going to be setting up a brooder. Depending on the age of the chickens that you're getting, if they're a chick, which is 1 to usually about 4 to 6 weeks of age, that's what we'll consider a chick. And then between the ages of 6 weeks until they start either laying or crowing, if it's a rooster, those are called pullets. So that's kind of that intermediate teenage stage of a chicken. We also wanted to go over water, and some of these are pretty intuitive. Yes, we know that chickens need to have water. Yes, we know they need to have the right feed and they need to have shelter, but we wanted to go over the why and a little bit more in depth into each of those topics. So the first one, city regulations. Every city is different, so it's really hard to do a generic presentation on these are the regulations, this is what you need to look out for. Every city has created their own regulations based on their experience or their goals and what they would want. Some cities, and I haven't came across any in Utah, but some cities do require a permit, and there's a fee that's associated with that, and it goes in coordinates with how many birds you're going to have. And it's a one-time flat fee if you're going to do the chickens. So just keep that in mind. You may need a permit, most likely not, but that's something that is out there. There's usually a maximum number of birds that you can have, and that's according to your lot size. So most lots for backyard growers are going to be pretty small, but they may have some regulations on how many birds you can have. For example, one that we found, you can have a max of 200 hens, which I don't know anyone's going to want 200 hens per acre, which an acre is a pretty good amount of land, and you can fit that many birds on there. But that's just an example of things to look for. For a backyard farm, you may have a max of 6 birds. And so you want to make sure that you're not going over that, which may cause problems. The most common restriction we're going to find, though, in every city is going to have some sort of code or regulation. Roosters are almost always there, and they're usually banned within the city limits. And that's partly being a good steward of your chickens. You don't want to be a problem for your neighbors. Roosters stereotypically will crow when the sun comes up. In my experience, they are crowing at all kinds of weird hours of the night, and it's not pleasant to have a neighbor with a rooster sometimes. But keep in mind, roosters are generally restricted, and keep that in mind as you're ordering birds. You can get a sex-linked bird or a bird that they can give some sort of a guarantee that you'll only get hens. So that there are some restrictions there. And other ones are going to be, you may have a location distance from your house. You can have your chicken coop within so many feet, or you can't have them within so many feet of your home. So your coop has to be at least usually 15 to 20 feet away. So also the size is a big one, and this is a generic measurement. So for every 2 square feet is enough space for a bird, and that's typically if they're able to have a run, and if they're able to free range, it's 2 square feet within the coop. Is kind of restricts how many birds you can have. A lot of kits you'll purchase will base their kit size off of this. So you may purchase a coop that can house 4 to 6 birds. They're basing it off of the square footage on the inside and how many can fit in there comfortably. If they're going to be confined to the coop and if they have a small run, usually it's requested that you'll have more square footage. So 6 feet square feet per bird. So that would be like a 3 foot by 2 foot space for a bird. Also cleanliness, you don't want to have foul odors coming out of your chicken coop. Chicken manure actually doesn't have much of an odor at all if managed correctly. If you're having odors come out of your coop, there is a management issue that you need to address and add. Also the feed, if it's open feed and if you have your bags of feed, and if they're open, you need to make sure that they're in a container, and that deters the mice. You will probably have mice problems just because there is a lot more food for them in those areas, but excluding them as much as you can from your actual feed storage is best practice. And other regulations, you may have some regulations on selling of eggs, selling of chicks as a hatchery. There are going to be some regulations there that will be different. Selling compost, there's usually some rules on processing or slaughtering the birds as well. So keep that in mind. There are going to be some regulations. Just be aware of what your city ordinances are. Usually they're pretty chicken friendly, and you can usually have chickens. So this next slide, and I really like this picture of the chicken with all the little chicks popping out from underneath her. We're going to talk about brooding next. If you purchase chicks from the farm store, or if you're ordering them online, the hen is not there anymore. So the hen has a really important purpose when raising chicks, obviously. And when we take the hen away, we then become the mother hen, basically. We're in charge and responsible of making sure they have everything they need. One fact that you need to be aware of with chicks is chicks do not generate enough heat to survive until they're about 4 weeks of age, 4 to 6 weeks, kind of that window. That's when their feathers have developed enough and they're able to retain and hold that heat in and be able to survive much better. So a chick, that really cute stage, like all these pictures are, they're only in that stage for about a week, and then they start getting feathers and they become kind of these ugly little creatures for a little bit until their feathers develop. But that down is what those little tiny feathers, those soft feathers are called. They don't have the ability to hold in heat, and that doesn't come until the feathers come in. So some different things that we provide heat with. We have a heat lamp, which is this picture in the top left. There's also a heat pad, which is a little bit of a safer option. There's a lot of stories and a lot of experiences shown that heat lamps have caused a lot of fires, depending on what your brooder is made out of and what happens to that lamp if it's not secured very well. Heat plates are a much safer option, and we want to make sure people are aware of those. If they wanted to purchase something that's a little bit safer, they don't have to worry about as much as a fire hazard. Heat plates are a great option. They're adjustable, so as the chicks get older, you can adjust it so they get a little bit higher. So the brooder and things that you have to have. A brooder is basically a containment to keep those chicks in one spot. You're providing the heat, water, feed. Usually the wood shavings are on the bottom or for cleanliness. It helps catch the fecal matter and the residues, and it's changed at least weekly. And these are some examples of brooders. They're pretty inexpensive, and we usually don't encourage people to make a brooder like out of wood, like the one in the top left. They're only going to be in there for a couple of weeks, and then you have to do something with your brooder. So some ideas that you could go with. The first one, most common, is a cardboard box. Again, there are a lot of concerns with using a heat lamp in a cardboard box because of the amount of heat they put off, and it is a fire hazard. So be aware of that if you're going to use one. And I put this example in here because it's not the greatest example. I did that on purpose. You can tell it's a little bit away from the sides, but if that heat lamp gets knocked by something, and it could cause a fire. But some other options are using a kid pool, a wood box. Water troughs are often used, something that's metal. We've used hoops of fine mesh that it's a roll of mesh. You tie the ends together so it makes a hoop, and you can put everything on the inside, and it contains the chicks pretty well. And then wood chips are typically used for flooring, just something to catch the defecation or the fecal matter that comes out of the chicks. And you do want to change that at least weekly. Water is the next thing we wanted to go over. Water is the #1 nutrient needed by chicks, and there is a very strong correlation with the amount of feed that they can consume and the water that they can consume. If the water is gone, they'll go off of feed, and they won't they won't eat feed anymore. Water is required to move nutrients and feed throughout the chicken, just like a human, very similar, right? But there is a very strong correlation. If they don't have water, they'll go off feed. That will negatively impact your egg production. The chicken's health, of course, is a huge concern there. But making sure they have an open source of water. And what we mean by open source is 100% of the time they have access to good, clean water. There's a lot of ways to deliver it. The most common in the top corner are these bells, water bells, or just a reservoir that you do have to monitor and fill up as they drain. Commercially, we have a pressurized system that use drippers and plungers to make sure water's at the right level. It can be as simple as having a pot or a pan. Also, I put this in here because if you look at that water, it's not necessarily a very clean source of water, and it probably needs to be, the water needs to be removed and the container scrubbed and then filled back up. Open containers are great, but keep in mind you will have to be cleaning that water sometimes daily, just because they do defecate in it, and they can get dirt and scratch things into it. Some other examples of water, these are somewhat newer innovations that people have come up with. These are nipples. So you'd screw them into the bottom of a bucket and suspend it above the chicken. So it's about the same level of the chicken's head or just a little bit above, so they kind of knock those little nipples and water comes out, and then they can swallow and drink that. And chickens get trained to those pretty easy. One of the concerns that we have, and especially as cold as it is today, is all these containers I've shown you will freeze, and you want to make sure that they can't eat ice, so you have to have some source for liquid water. So putting a heater into these buckets or buying a heated bucket or trough for the winter is required if you're going to have chickens through the winter. The next one, this is a large one, so we'll spend a little bit of time on feed, and this is where we see the most problems with chickens as well. For the general chicken's diet, they're eating a lot of corn, they're eating a lot of soybean meal, and they're also eating other things as well. Especially if they're free range, they're going to be out, they'll be eating insects, they'll eat a little bit of grass and different forages. So there are some things that they'll eat that are a little hard to account for, but we feed them this diet because it has all the nutrients in it that they need at different formulations. But this is where we do see a lot of problems, because there are some things that people get in the habit of feeding them all of the time that don't have the right nutritional value, and it does have a negative effect on the chicken's health and also their egg production. So this slide, I wanted to show you three different, this is protein. So we're going to talk about protein for just a minute, and pretty briefly. We're not going to go super in depth, but we want to make sure you're aware of the reasons why we feed them protein. So this top one is meat types of birds. So these are broilers or Cornish crosses. This next one are going to be layers, and then the last one are dual purpose. So those have a little bit more meat on them, but they're also laying eggs. You'll notice on all of these, when they're 0 to 2 or 0 to 6 weeks of age, their protein is a little bit higher. It's elevated. This is going to be a chick starter feed. And then they do come formulated with the higher protein to accommodate the growth and all the changes that they're going through. Once they're into production, it kind of evens out. We're usually around 17 to 18% protein. Again, if you're buying a layer feed or a layer pellet or mesh type feed, they're formulated at that level. But if you want to check it, you can look at the levels, see what the protein content is. Usually it'll even say on the front of the bag what the protein levels are. And different birds have different requirements as well. But we're usually around 17% when they're in production. The biggest one that I wanted to bring up, and this is where we see the problems come in, is the calcium levels. So this first example on my left, I'm hoping it's on your left as well, but this is a chick starter, and we're looking at the calcium levels. So the calcium level, we're at less than 1% of calcium in a chick starter level. In a layer diet, we're at about 4%, which goes up huge. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. An egg shell has a tremendous amount of calcium in it, and that calcium has to come from somewhere. Chickens will eat feed, and they'll actually take that calcium, and it's stored in their bones, in their skeletal system, and then they draw from that to be able to create the eggs. So if they're in heavy egg production, we have to make sure they're getting a lot of calcium, and that's where the feed comes in. They need to have an open access to feed as well, just like water. Even if they're free range, make sure they have access to layer pellets or something that has that calcium in it to ensure that they're getting the right calcium. Every egg will use about 2 grams of calcium per egg, and a hen has to consume about 6.5 pounds of calcium per year, per laying year. That's more than their body weight. That's a tremendous amount of calcium that they have to consume, and we have to provide that. If we're not providing it, that's where you'll get soft-shelled eggs. That's where chickens may not last as long because it's such a huge drain on their skeletal system that we'll start having some severe problems. So making sure that you have an open source of layer type feed. Some formulations of feed are, and there's not really one that's any better than the other, but there are mashes, meals. We're going to talk about scratch next, and pellets. So that's the formulations. They're all very common. Not one's necessarily any better than the other, but just know there's different formulations as well. So the scoop on chicken scratch, this is where we have some problems. Chicken scratch, looking at this chart on the calcium, there's a maximum and a minimum. So when we feed them this chicken scratch, these are the boundaries that the calcium is going to be in. It's less than 0.01 is the minimum percentage that they'll be getting. At the very most, they're going to get 0.5%, which is only 1/8 of the calcium requirement that they need. They can get a little bit of calcium from water. They'll get a little bit if they're foraging around, but they're usually going to be in a deficit on calcium if we're just feeding chicken scratch. And chicken scratch, it does have some good nutrient content to it otherwise, but it's kind of like candy. You'll notice if you mix chicken scratch with your layer pellets, they're always going to be scratching and feeding through it. It's not because they're going to town on it. They're usually selecting for the chicken scratch and they're leaving the layer pellets. And this is kind of like their candy. They absolutely love it. And it's fun. It's not a bad thing to throw out a handful of scratch to them every day and something for them to enjoy and play in, but don't feed it to them exclusively. They have to have access to the calcium and the layer feed as well. Here's some example of feeders. Some of them are inexpensive. They're made out of buckets. One of the problems that we do have with feeders is they will bill out some of the feed that'll get on the ground, and that can cause some rodent problems. So if you can suspend your feeders off the ground, kind of like this middle picture, they were probably just barely put up, so there's not any feed that you can see on the bottom, but it reduces the chicken's ability to be able to kind of scrape that feed out. They can only kind of peck and eat out of that trough that's about a little bit lower than their head height. We've created this one. This is a bucket that I've used in my coop. The chickens have to stick their head in and peck around. They can't really pull anything out. These are another inexpensive option. They work pretty well. There's a little bit of feed in this top right corner on these pipe feeders that were created. It has kind of a reservoir. They're pretty nice to use. They don't have a ton on the ground, and they actually have less usually than the traditional metal buckets that you buy, but they're a great option as well. You can tell this grower has chicken scratch and layer pellets available at all times as well. And then in the bottom right corner, this is kind of the bad example. I always like to put one bad picture in there, but you can tell there's a lot of feed on the ground. This bucket's laying directly on the ground. The chickens love to play in things, and they'll bill it out with their beaks, and they'll also scratch around with it with their feet. And you can tell there's just a ton of feed on the ground. And that's more of a meal type feed, but it's all over the floor, and it creates some rodent problems. So just to review this first section, common feeding mistakes of chicken owners: feeding solely cracked corn or scratch, which is consistent of wheat, corn, oats, and some other grains. But that is a concern. That's a problem. We see that quite a bit. Also expecting chickens to thrive on grass, green chopped lettuce, and other low nutrient feeds. They will eat it and they like it, but it doesn't have the nutrients that they need to be healthy and to produce a good amount of eggs. Also giving inappropriate medications. There used to be a lot of medicated feed, and we actually won't find that anymore. So if you're looking for that medicated feed, we found that it caused more problems and did more harm than good. And it was pulled off of the market. So you won't find medicated feeds anymore. There's another presentation that I'll show you where to find it, but it has some information on how to prevent some of the diseases with vaccinations when chicks are young, like Merrick's disease and different things. But for feeding and taking care of chicks, we usually don't medicate. It's usually something that they have to get when they're hatched. Also, we don't give them excess treats. We can give them treats. I'm not discouraging treats, but don't go to town on giving them a bunch of treats. We want to make sure they're eating what they're supposed to, and on occasion they get a fun treat. So I'll go through this one pretty quick. I just want to show you different examples of coops. So these are two options that we generally see. This first one underneath the title is kind of the chickens will go into their coop at night, it's locked, and then they're free range basically. They go through the yard, do whatever they want. Other folks don't want to have the chickens roaming through the yard. They may have a garden right next door. They may not like having the chicken poop throughout their grass and different things, so they will confine them to a run, or they may let them out occasionally out of that run as well. But it's an area that they can be confined to and be happy and meet all their needs in as well. So what does a coop need to have? They need to have nest boxes. That's where they're going to lay their eggs. These are usually dark, excluded places, so they'll lay in those places. They love to lay in dark, kind of confined spots. That's their favorite thing to do. Even if you have a whole row of nest boxes, they will find the darkest one. And if you had 20 birds, you're going to have 20 birds laying in that one, maybe two different nest boxes. And then the rest will go unused. They have their favorite ones and their preference, and they're almost always the darkest one. A perch, and that's kind of optional, but they love to perch. If you have a perch, they will use it, and they're usually suspended. It's just a bar usually that they'll perch on at night. They're usually 6 to 10 inches off the ground, but perches are nice but not required. Ventilation is almost required. It allows circulation through the winter time to help reduce the buildup of ammonia, and that would be something you can have your ventilation cracked, not all the way open. And in the summer, it reduces the heat, and you would have it all the way open to make sure that there's some air circulation. The heat that builds up goes to the top, can get out. You need an area for food and water, and of course, having it enclosed enough that they have the security they need. Okay, and then these next two slides, sorry, I'm going a little bit fast. I'm getting a little bit low on time, but what breed of chicken should I pick is a fun question. So things to look for is the number of eggs per year, and that's mostly overlooked. We're usually looking at these cool birds, but we're not looking at the egg production. If you want the egg production, make sure they're laying an adequate or a high number of eggs, which you can almost get an egg a day. It's usually about every 26 hours they'll lay an egg. So not every day, but almost every day you can get an egg on some breeds, not everyone. Some people will select a bird just off of the color of the egg. There's blue, green, olive colors, chocolate color, that super dark brown, brown, of course, white, pink. There's a bunch of different colors of eggs, and that's a factor that people look for. Roosters, if you want a rooster or not, or if you're able to have one, they're nice to have around. They can be a little bit mean sometimes, but they're beautiful birds. They have the more color, more plumage. They're neat to have as well. Flightiness, if they're prone to trying to fly out of the coop. The plumage, the type of feathers that they have, the type of comb that they're going to have, which is just here on top of their head. This is a single comb example. The size of the bird, and if it's a show bird versus a layer, you can get like a sea bright, which aren't known, or a Polish bird, which aren't known for laying eggs, but they're beautiful birds that you can take to the county fair, or if you have kids, have them take them and show them at the county fair. It's a lot of fun. If they're going to be a meat bird, and if they're broody. Some birds are more broody, and that means that they're prone to sit on eggs and they're trying to hatch them. If they're fertilized or not, they're going to try and hatch those eggs, and they puff up when you open the coop, and they can make some weird noises sometimes too. But some birds are prone to do that, some are not. So comparing them side by side, we're looking at, on these two examples, a Rhode Island Red and an Americana. If they're an APA standard bird, are they dual purpose? Weeks to maturity is another big one. I love Americanas, and I got a couple 2 years ago. I couldn't get eggs out of those things. It was 19 weeks, 20 weeks, 21 weeks. They don't really start laying until 24 to 28 weeks. Whereas like a Rhode Island Red or a lot of our common commercialized birds, it's about 19 weeks, and you can start seeing some eggs after that. But the color of the egg, the size of the egg, if you want large to extra large eggs or just medium sized, whatever you're trying to get, that's factored into the breed typically. How many eggs per year is a big one. So on Rhode Island Reds, 200 to 280. I'm getting a bit fewer with my Americanas, where it's only 200 to 250 eggs per year. The skin color, they have different colors of skin underneath their feathers. The comb style, if they're hardy, most birds, at least for Utah's purposes, you can have almost any breed of bird if you have the right coop and conditions to make sure that they're not going to get way too cold, that they have shelter. Usually their feathers are sufficient, and you won't see problems with different birds. But that is a factor. There are some that do like warmer climates, and some that are exclusive to warm climates. But be aware that most birds you can get and have in the state of Utah. Then the plumage, some of them don't have any, but the reason I like Americanas is they have muffs, beards, and full tails, but they have these weird little growths that come out of their face, and they're kind of fun looking. But if their temperament, there's a lot of different things to look at with those. Okay, and then this is the last slide, and I'll leave this one up. This has some more information if you want to find some, and I'll try and put these into the chat after I'm done. But the first one, this middle one, not the first one, the middle one is the extension poultry website. So you could do a Google search, type USU poultry, this site will come up first. But it's extension.usu.edu/poultry, and it has a bunch of fact sheets on different birds, raising them, game birds, even if you're doing game birds. This other one is last year's video from this conference. And this was Dr. David Frame, and he gave an awesome presentation on diseases of backyard poultry. That's just the common ones. So there's a QR link if you wanted to take a picture and save it in your phone. I'll also copy that and I'll put it in the chat. But it's a YouTube video and you can watch it. It'll be about 30 minutes long, but he's going over the different diseases. So anyways, with that, I think I'm out of time. So I'll end.
Okay, thanks, Ben. That was great. You maybe have time for just like a question or so. I'm going to ask if it's okay if you can maybe look in the Q&A and type in answers to any of the questions that we're not able to get to.